Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
One Strange Night, Volume 2, Story Number 1. One night, I was on a job, armed security, at this site, which was an early 1900 school. They were adding some additions to it. This was still an active school. One night, my brother, also armed security, was coming home from a job on the road. He stopped to say hi because it was like 2 a.m. and he rarely got to see me anymore because of our weird shifts. The building was being added in a strange way, like they ripped an old brick wall down and added temporary stairs to be able to get into the second story that they were building. They added these big windowsills, but it didn't have a roof or ceiling yet. I went up there a lot. The windows were about 7 feet off the floor, so you couldn't just peek over and look out. Anyway, my brother showed up, and we walked around a bit. But when we got back to the cars, we heard a noise up there by the windowsill. It was maybe a 6 foot long by 6 foot high window sill. I'm assuming for sunlight to come in or something. We shined a big spotlight up there and saw a glowing eye. We both figured it was a cat up in the window sill until my brother jokingly taunted it and said, "If you're a demon, show yourself." And I kid you not, the other eye appeared, and they were like 6 inches apart from each other. We even saw it blink several times and we freaked out. I started to bring my dog with me after that night. Never saw the eyes again, but my brother was really humbled by what he saw. Never taunted one of those again. Story number 2. When I was about 5 or 6, my mother worked at a nursing home called the Bryan Center. I would often be picked up by her after school and taken to go sit in the employee break room until she got off from her shift. It was in a corner of the basement. For reference, the building is built into the side of a hill. It had 2 or 3 stories, but by the time you got to the street, you could only see the second or third floor at ground level. My mom worked down there in the invalid ward, people who were permanently bedbound. And incidentally, the building used to be the county hospital, and the basement was originally the morgue. Now, my mom saw a lot of strange stuff while she was there, including a dark man wearing a hat that had a dog with red eyes, and a patient being thrown around by an unseen force despite being paralyzed by a stroke, while screaming about she had made a deal with the devil and he was there to take her soul. And the elevators randomly changing floors and opening, and the sound of footsteps coming down the hall, but no one was there. She routinely also heard babies crying and even saw a baby crawling down the hallway in the middle of the night shift. It disappeared into the old morgue. My story, however, is about me. Just across from the parking lot door and the corner where the break room was located was a security desk built into the opposite corner where the two halls met. The security guard was my buddy. He was this guy who would listen to me prattle on and ask me about what I was watching on the break room TV. He would give me quarters for the vending machine to go get snacks when I was hungry. My mom was pretty broke at that time, and school lunch had been a long time ago, and I had longer till dinner around 7, so my security guard buddy was my best friend. He went off on rounds like every hour or so, and sometimes my mom would pop into the break room and ask if I was all right. She'd ask me where I'd got the money from, and I told her the security guard gave me a quarter. She'd give me a weird look, but I figured she was just having a stranger danger moment. Well, fast forward years later, my mom just had a knee replacement, and at the same time, I caught pertussis while pregnant. So we're both laying in bed, binging on Netflix, and I go to ask her, "Hey, what was that dude's name? The security guard who used to buy me all those honey buns, remember? That skinny tall guy." My mom told me that not only did they not have a security guard at the time at all, but that also at the time, the only employee there in that area were female nurses. Never been able to figure it out. I would say it's a false memory, but how did I get all that money? Next story. I had this experience many years ago in Death Valley, California during a military training exercise. My unit was conducting our month-long pre-deployment training at NTC, the National Training Center, and we were 2 weeks into it, and it was roughly day 3 of 7 of our actual field exercise, or the field as most U.S. military personnel call it. For those that don't know, the field is when you actually go out into the training grounds and simulate combat and train as if you were really deployed. This helps your unit to be prepared for the real deal. No sleeping, lots of physical labor, getting attacked, and whatnot. It really is an awful but also fun time all around. Like I mentioned, it was about day 3 or so, and my platoon was positioned several kilometers from the action, or the front, as we were an artillery unit, so we were relatively safe from any enemies where we were. During the day, we were busy providing artillery fire for our friendlies and moving every so often to prevent being pinpointed by the enemy. But as night came, our forces halted their offensive, and so we weren't receiving any missions and we weren't changing positions. This break in action and movement finally gave us the time to get some well deserved rest before we had to get back at it again in the morning. We couldn't all just sleep at once for security and to be ready in case a call for support came in, so we all took turns pulling guard duty, which cycled through everybody, allowing everyone a couple hours rest while maintaining readiness. I had been up for over 72 hours at that point, with a little 10-minute nap here and there. I remember being fourth on guard, so that gave me roughly 4 hours of sleep. I decided to sleep on top of our rucksacks in the back of a Humvee trailer, as it was the only place to lie down. It was not comfortable, but as soon as my head was down, I was fast asleep. A couple of hours later, my squad mate woke me up from my guard shift, and I swear it felt like I'd just fallen asleep. I was mad, but once I got up, I was surprisingly awake and refreshed. I grabbed my gear and headed for our vehicle. We were using M992s, which is a big tracked ammo carrier, as a command vehicle. It had a hatch on the top that you sit in and look out of, and from there you are sitting 12 or so feet off the ground. It gives a nice 360 view. We also had night vision goggles up there to see, as it is super dark in the desert at night. All in all, a pretty nice setup. This is where my experience happened. It was about 20 minutes in, and I was enjoying looking at the stars, the mountains, and the beauty of the desert at night through the night vision goggles. As I was looking around, something in the distance caught my eye. At first, I saw movement, but when I focused the night vision on the area, I saw something strange. Initially, I thought it was a trash bag or tarp blowing in the wind, but the more I got the night vision focused, the better I could make it out. It appeared to be a cloaked figure, walking towards me at about 200 to 300 meters away. It looked like the stereotypical depiction of the Grim Reaper. I could see a hood, but no face underneath. It even had one arm out to the side like it was holding something, but I couldn't see anything in its hand. Then I realized it wasn't walking. It was disappearing and reappearing farther ahead. It appeared as if it was teleporting 3 or so meters ahead every second. It honestly looked like someone was lagging in a video game, but in real life. It would also occasionally teleport a few meters to the left or right, so it wasn't walking in a straight line. I even rubbed my eyes and looked away and then back, and it was still there, silently moving through the barren sand dunes. I was scared and completely confused. My brain raced to come up with an answer as to what it was I was witnessing. Before I could think of a rational explanation, I moved my eyes away and back one more time, and it suddenly disappeared. I tried looking all around me, but it was gone. The whole event lasted maybe a few minutes. I didn't want to sound like I was crazy, so I didn't say anything. Anyway, when you get back from the field at NTC, you go to a mock base called Ruba to put all your equipment away and load it on trains to be shipped back along with your vehicles to your home base elsewhere in the country. During this time, I learned that every time a unit goes to NTC, at least one person dies during the training rotation. No one had died while we were in the field, which is the dangerous part, and the part most people do. It was smooth sailing from there, so everyone was kind of relieved, thinking we would go home safe for once. However, a soldier from another unit died in Ruba when we got back from a traumatic accident, and I was part of a group that was involuntarily volunteered to clean up the mess that was left behind. I was so upset, but luckily it was just bloody bandages and medical supplies, but sad and creepy nonetheless. After the cleanup, I was thinking about my experience again, and part of me thought what I saw somehow correlated to the death because the whole Grim Reaper thing. I still honestly don't know what to think of what I saw that night. I had never seen anything like that before or since. There were no friendlies near where I saw it, and the nearest unit was kilometers away at the time. I highly doubt one person could have just walked out in the desert away from everyone else, and like I said, we were far from the enemy. I also can't explain the sudden vanishing of the figure either, as the desert is empty and barren, so nothing to hide behind, and I would have seen something or someone lying down. I was alert, not tired because I got no sleep, not hungry and hydrated. I don't think it was my eyes playing tricks on me either. So, what it was, I guess I'll just never get an answer to that one. Next story. I had a bad case of pneumonia when I was 11 or 12. We were poor, couldn't afford a hospital. I was in bed for a long time. My mom worked, didn't have a dad. My aunt was a nurse, would check in, but largely I just slept in my bed and tried to breathe. It might have been a fever dream, but I saw something enter my room. A ghost-like dark humanoid wreathed in shadows. I was terrified and couldn't move. I was too weak to move and couldn't pull in enough air to scream. It reached into my chest. I felt it grip something inside of me. The pain was intense. It pulled hard, and my body was yanked with it, but whatever it was trying to rip free wasn't coming loose. I couldn't fight back. I was just limp and exhausted child. It pulled again, but harder, and I was lifted off the bed, but again nothing pulled out of me. It tried one last time, and it hurt so much, but whatever it was trying to take wouldn't pull free. It released its grip, turned around, and floated out of the doorway. I watched it leave, having been turned on my side facing the door from the struggle. I was too scared to sleep, and my chest hurt. My aunt arrived, I asked her about it, and she dismissed it as just a bad dream. She helped me to the bathroom and fed me, checked my vitals, stayed a while, and kept me company until my mom got home from work. I told my mom, but she also dismissed it as just a dream. But I was awake. I had been actively trying to breathe and was afraid that if I slept, I would die, that I would stop breathing. Not long after I started to recover, my lungs were weak for a very long time. I remember that experience like it was yesterday. I remember how much it hurt. I remember what it felt like to have something reach inside and grip whatever it was wanting. Cold and sharp talons taking a hold of something. It's not the only time I've encountered something hard to explain, but I'd rather believe it was just a fever dream. Next story. I've been a critical care registered nurse for 22 years, and unfortunately, one of the responsibilities of that profession involves transporting the deceased to the morgue with a security officer escort. This is a trip I have now made several times. Generally, I don't find the experience to be creepy in any way. As far as I'm concerned, I'm merely transferring human remains from point A to point B. I usually feel some sadness, but this is something I'm used to. But scared? Nope. Until one particular shift with one particular patient. This individual arrived in my unit in full cardiopulmonary arrest. He had already coded several times in the cath lab, and things weren't looking too optimistic for him. He had arrived as an inmate from the county jail, where he had cardiac arrested in his jail cell. Despite all possible interventions, we were unable to resuscitate him. Even though he technically had not been my assigned patient, I transported him to the morgue accompanied by a security officer per protocol. The guard and I didn't really talk during the transport, and as it was a very large hospital, the trip took about 10 minutes. It was a long 10 minutes. As we pushed the cart down the hall that immediately led to the morgue, I was suddenly overcome by this strange sense of dread and being watched. For some reason, I felt like the devil himself was walking right beside me. Every hair on my neck was standing on end. Feeling like a paranoid freak, I said nothing to the officer, but I felt scared. After we deposited the body in the morgue, we were walking back down the hallway we came from. The sense of dread had evaporated. He offhandedly said to me, "Were you completely freaked out, or is it just me?" I feel paranoid, but I felt like something was watching me and it was evil. I nodded in agreement, and that was all we said about it. We found out later this patient had been charged with 200 plus known horrific crimes involving children and was awaiting sentencing. Next story. I work security and I had picked up an overnight shift at a different post other than my usual post for some OT. I can't get too specific about where I work, and I wish I could post the video, but I need to keep my job. So, the other night, I'm working this post that was pretty much shut down with roadblocks up to check any and all personnel that do try to enter the facility. Both roads that led to my gate were blocked off, one less than half a mile just north of me, and another little over 2 miles to my southwest, around a bend that was completely out of sight. Well, the one just north of me, when people do pull up to it late at night, the headlights will just be visible down by me on my cameras. I was sitting there drinking some coffee to try and keep myself awake. I had hardly seen anybody. My site was inactive due to what we call a hard down, with only essential personnel being granted entry. A truck had just come pulling up to the guard shack just north of me as I watched on camera, and as the truck is pulling up and coming to a stop, I see a reflection in the camera that I thought was just the lights of the truck, till I opened up my eyes a little wider to focus, and I saw it effing move. What it looked like was a complete silhouette of a person, and I thought maybe somebody was walking up to my gate in the dark, and it made me jump out of my seat to look out the front window to confirm a visual. As I'm looking out, I see absolutely nothing, and I look back to the monitor, but it's there on the screen, the silhouette of a man that looks to be wearing a hazmat suit. I kept looking back and forth from the window to the camera, and as I'm doing this in lifetime, I'm just catching glimpses of what the camera is picking up. I radioed to the other two guards, asking if they had let any personnel get through their checkpoints, and get a negative response back asking me what's up. I told them to stand by as I went to review what I saw in the recording. To my absolute disbelief, I watched stunned as the truck comes pulling to the north guard shack, its lights shine on some movement. What I could make out was a silhouetted figure of a man wearing a hazmat suit, walking. When the truck comes to a stop, the man also stops, looks towards the truck, does a double take from me to the truck, and just walks across the road and disappears. I thought I was going crazy and maybe seeing things because of my lack of sleep. I clipped and saved that portion of the video and waited till shift change to show the other guards I worked with overnight and the ones coming to relieve us. I never said anything back that night or anything to the guards coming on shift, and just played the clip for them. Everybody's jaw dropped, and they saw exactly what I did without me pointing out anything. This is a regular occurrence out where you work. Most of the guards that have been here a while have seen things and have stories, and I just finally got what I had been waiting for, solid proof for myself. And what it is or who it is, nobody has an answer to that. Next story. One day I was standing at a hospital security checkpoint and was looking at the cameras. The friendly security guard didn't mind, and I was standing next to him just outside the window. This was an internal building checkpoint. Next thing you know, there's a dark silhouetted man right front and center on one of the feeds. Looked like they had a trench coat on. I called to the guard to look at that feed as his back was temporarily turned. He looked at it and was shocked. He immediately radioed for another guard in that area to go check it out. He was shaken by what we had just seen. It stared blankly into the camera for a few more seconds while we looked on in disbelief before it walked off screen. I asked the guard where the camera was at. He said it was in the basement, in a tunnel where they rolled the deceased bodies on gurneys through to their storage facilities. Next story. I was a new night shift CNA at my local children's hospital and had heard some stories from nurses and other assistants that are worth mentioning. Shortly before I began, a CNA was at her station on the computer. She was alone at this time since the other CNA was out doing rounds and wouldn't be back for at least 15 minutes. As she's working away, something catches the corner of her eye, enough for her to look in that direction, which was looking into an empty room. The room itself was lightly lit, so as to make it easier for a new patient to come in at any time. But no one was assigned to that room. Before she turned back to the computer, she saw a young boy with blonde hair in a gown walk from behind the slightly drawn curtain to the bathroom. From what I heard, she instantly freaked out and went to find nurses, all of which confirmed the room was empty, but she insisted she saw someone walk into the bathroom. They checked and was empty. She was so distraught that she actually was told to go home and to take it easy. It was also common knowledge that a woman is often seen walking through a specific hallway and even seen during the day. There's also a story of when a security guard and several staff heard a phantom infant crying in an empty room. They checked the cameras and sure enough, the room was empty. When they opened the door, the crying would stop, but then resume shortly after closing the door again. I have worked several night shifts now and have yet to encounter anything myself. The creepiest so far has been the child laughing while asleep in a dark room. It's not expected and incredibly uncomfortable initially. Then it's a little cute. Another time a grandmother was staying overnight and was straight up talking in her sleep. It sounded like she was having a conversation with someone while facing the wall. Again, creepy when you don't expect it, especially in a dark room. Next story. My father died in 2008 when I had just completed my high school and we were in enormous debt. I still am in poverty, but that story can be told another day. So, to continue my studies, I needed to find work, and for 3 years, I sold pagodas on the street and taught little children math. In 2012, I was recruited into an ISP in our small town to work in the night shift. During the interview, I was particularly asked if I would feel scared to stay alone at night in the third story of the enormous building with one security guard on the ground floor. I was never comfortable, but I needed a job. Plus, being on night shift, I could attend my college during the day. I worked in that office between February 2012 to August 2013, and during this time, I never got curious to ask anyone why no one wanted to work at night. I heard before me someone used to work at night, but he just left abruptly. My work was to pick calls from clients who would have problems with their internet connection and provide simple solutions. Anything complex, and I had to note down their names and address and pass the list to my senior via email, and technicians would take care of them during the next day. It was a simple job, and I would not receive much calls, and so by 11 I would spread a thick blanket on the floor and fall asleep with the receivers by my head and in case someone phoned. This is now June 2013, and this was the 1 month that I was supposed to find out why no one was ready to work at night. That night, the security guard with whom I had developed a very close friendship came to the third floor and asked me if he could sleep in my room as there were too many mosquitoes in the ground floor. Understand, he was supposed to stay awake, but he used to take advantage of my attitude and slept every night, and the whole building had no security cameras. Anyway, we were both sleeping in the same room. The two receivers were on either side of my head, and the lights were turned off. I'd locked the door loosely, keeping the lights of the corridor on. At about 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound as if someone was walking with his feet dragging on the floor. It was a strange sound and very loud. I was facing the door and could see the light on the other side of the door through the thin gap between the floor and the door. I stayed down staring directly at that gap, trying to understand what or who was that thing or person that was making the noise. As I waited, the sound got louder and louder, and soon I saw feet of someone crossing my door. My heartbeat got faster, but I thought that it must be the security guard, but when I looked behind me, he was fast asleep. My blood froze at this, and the sound started to get louder again, and soon the feet reappeared near my door. This time, instead of just crossing my door, it stopped there and didn't move. I waited for whoever it was to move away, but he wouldn't. Then, I did the stupidest thing. I thought it could be an intruder, and instead of waking up the security guard quickly, I tiptoed to the door while the thing stood there and pulled it open suddenly. There was no one but a gust of wind in my face, causing me to get goosebumps all over. I woke up the guard now and explained to him everything. He took out his torch, turned on all the lights, and searched the whole building, but couldn't find anyone. Finally, he came to me and said that it could be a demon. I couldn't sleep again. I dropped messages to those who worked during the day explaining what happened. I reached the office the next day a little early to catch the others before they left. This was when the stories started to emerge. One explained that he did the night shift a few days and he could always hear someone climbing up and down the stairs in the middle of the night. Another said that he saw a chair being moved around from one corner of the terrace to another by something that wasn't visible. That's why no one would like to work at night. And I stayed there for more than a year. I left the company in August after they gave me an increment of $3 after working for more than 1 year. They used to pay me $54 a month. Yes, the salary is scarier than the story or the demon in the story, but I needed to grasp anything I could to get my bachelor's degree completed. I used to attend college in the morning, teach from afternoon to twilight, and then go to the office. The cost of education and staying alive plunged me into further debt from which I am yet to recover completely, but God has been faithful all the time. They have installed cameras in the office these days, and I sometimes wonder if they have been able to capture anything. Next story. So, I've had a few paranormal experiences in my life thus far. Some frightening stuff, but nothing that was actually dangerous in retrospect. I recently started a security job in a bank. I work overnight and monitor the entirety of the building's interior as well as patrol the exterior. The building is 6 stories with only the bottom one actually being the functional bank. The upper floors are mainly untouched, outdated offices with a few being rented by businesses. No one whatsoever is in the building during the night, and surveillance doesn't cover the upper floors because they're so well separated from the bank. While doing my rounds of the upper levels and checking to see if there's any unlocked rooms, for example, the bathrooms, closets, mechanical rooms, storage spaces, stairwells, the whole 9 yards. Didn't find anything as usual, but while I was on the 4th floor, I heard someone call my name and heard a door close. Of course, I was freaked out, but I pushed through the fear and tried to stay rational. I did a second sweep of the floor and again, nothing, and I got really scared. I got to the stairwell on that floor and opened the door to listen. Stairwells echo really bad, so we're taught to be silent and listen for intruders. While I'm standing there, my head picked through the door. I don't hear anything. Then I do. I hear 2 men's voices coming from the stairwell. I'm assuming it's above me. I announced myself and started up, but found nothing and didn't hear any doors open or close, which I should have. Then I'm at the last flight up to the roof and I hear loud steps running up the steps. I'm absolutely terrified and prepare myself for a physical altercation. Weapon at the ready, I wait for the perp to come to me because I'm on high ground. The steps sound close enough that I should be able to see the person causing them, but I don't. Then I hear labored breathing with the steps and still see nothing. Next thing I know, I'm physically pushed back. I didn't fall very far, more like collapsed into the steps behind me. The sounds continue to the roof door, and to my shock, it opens with a bang and then shuts. I actually saw it open and shut. It's normally locked, so I go to secure it and call the cops, but when I get to it, it's locked. I have absolutely no explanation for this. I've never been pushed or physically touched by an entity, and it shook me very badly. On top of this, the next night I was sitting in the lobby with the elevators behind me. Again, there's no one else in the building, and I hear the outdated elevator go up some floors, stop, and shift with weight, entering it, then come back down. I was absolutely terrified as it touched down and the doors opened, but there was no one in sight. When I got up to take a closer look, the steps pounded toward me, pushed me over, and ran up the stairwell adjacent to the elevator. What can I say? I'm terrified of this building. I'm the first female guard they've hired. This is a newer company. The men I've spoken to don't experience anything. So I wonder why it's picking on me. Next story. I've worked in a psych unit for 3 years. The unit itself is right above an active ER in a mostly empty hospital. Strange things happen a lot in our unit and the hospital at large. Call lights will go off in empty rooms, and sometimes empty rooms on units that have not been used since the place was a fully functioning hospital over a decade ago. Me and the rest of the staff have also heard footsteps, had things pushed off tables, and the old units you get the ever-present feeling that someone is right behind you. Everyone knows about it, and the older staff attribute it to a patient who died on the unit, but no one knows the name, but we all call him George. George seems pretty benevolent and just likes to kind of like screw around with us. One night in particular, I had gone back to the old unit because that's where we keep our copy paper and supplies. I get the usual behind me feeling, but this time I hear footsteps. Thinking it was security doing their rounds, I look to check, and not a soul is back there but me. This was confirmed when I went back out and security had just come up the elevator. Most of the older staff have a George story, and all of the ER and security especially do. One night, we had a call light keep coming on, and one of our medical charts had slammed to the floor almost as if it were timed because everything had just gotten quiet. We all sighed and said, "Cut it out, George." And sure enough, nothing else happened that night. All of this can be chalked up to coincidence, faulty wiring, and the hospital just being creepy. Our older security guards claim to have seen George, but who knows? I like to think we have a little paranormal prankster. Never a dull moment on the unit. Next story. Well, I paint ceiling murals for a restaurant group traveling to different locations around the United States. I paint script of full books on ceilings for this restaurant group. It's pretty cool. My wife and I were in Atlanta, Georgia back in early 2016. She read to me, I wrote, we worked that night, usually got to the job around 6:30 p.m. I think it was the second or third week of May. We got coffee, went in through the side door and talked until the last construction worker left. I started working around 7:45 p.m. I set up the ladder and had to prime a wall section above the bar area. 3-inch brush, a gallon of flat beige color paint, and a 9-inch roller setup. I started cutting the wall in and worked for more than 20 minutes. My wife said she was going to change into different clothes in our van in the parking lot. I worked for another 4 or 5 minutes and put my brush down on top of the paint bucket. Got down from the ladder to smoke a cigarette, and then all of a sudden, I wake up laying on one of the bench seats across the restaurant. Looking back at my wall as I stepped off the ladder was my last memory. The lights in the place were all flashing in succession with each other. I was scared, like a scary movie. I didn't see my wife. I looked at my phone. 2.5 hours had gone by. I called for her. Called on the phone, no answer. I immediately went to the parking garage, got to our van, and she was just waking up in the back of it, a little sitting space, and this was not like us. We just don't both fall asleep out of nowhere at the same time, no less. And we had been used to the work all night, sleep all day since February. She looked at her phone and freaked out due to how long she had been asleep. She also didn't remember falling asleep. Same as me. On the way back to the job, I explained to her about the lights flashing, and we talked to the security guard who reset and turned them off for us. He said someone had tripped a security alarm, but was oblivious to what could have done it. The alarm system wasn't turned on because of the construction workers. We also used the back door a lot and never set any alarm off. Either way, just weird that it happened at the same time. But the scariest thing was when I saw my paintbrush on top of the paint can on top of the ladder. The brush was still wet. Flat latex paint dries up on a brush in less than 2 hours in an air-conditioned environment. I put that brush down at almost 8 p.m. It was 10:45 p.m. when I picked up my brush again. My brush's timeline was only 5 to 10 minutes, whereas my wife and I was nearly 3 hours. And I have no explanation for that.